before World War II was even over, was already planning for like how are we going to push communists and radicals out of the labor movements of Western Europe, um, and how are we going to make sure that labor movements, especially in Latin America as well, which were also associated with left wing movements. There was the um, what was it called? Confederation of Latin American Unions, um, the CETAL, basically, led by Vicente Lombardo Toledano, who's a Marxist from Mexico. In any case, the left was very strong in the labor movements of the world. The AFL wanted to push those left wing elements out of foreign labor movements. And so they created the Free Trade Union Committee in 1944, which was supposed to be kind of like a subsidiary of the AFL. And initially, it was supposed to be the AFL and its affiliated unions would provide the funding for this organization, this Free Trade Union Committee, to exist. And it would eventually be funded by the CIA, but it was founded before the CIA existed. It was still just the Office of Strategic Services, was the wartime intelligence agency. Anyway, the Free Trade Union Committee was headed up by this guy, Jay Lovestone, who's a really kind of fascinating but unsavory kind of character in labor history. He was a former communist. He had been one of the like founders and early leaders of the Communist Party USA, but wound up becoming a fierce anti-communist between the 1930s and 1940s. But because he had a lot of like intimate knowledge about left-wing movements all around the world from his time as a leader in the Communist Party USA, he was sort of like this invaluable asset to the anti-communists in the AFL. And he also had a lot of experience with like dividing unions in the US, particularly the United Auto Workers in the late 1930s, trying to isolate and push out communists from US unions. So he was put in charge of the Free Trade Union Committee, and he had a whole like group of people that were like sort of loyal to him from his time as a leader of his own kind of anti-communist or Communist Party opposition faction in the 30s. And he sent them out to places like France and Italy, India, Indonesia, Japan, China, or Taiwan specifically, to try to undermine left-wing influence in foreign unions. It's especially big in Western Europe. Again, France and Italy were kind of like seen as the key countries because their labor movements had so much communist influence. And so they would like go and try to like find any opposition groups within a labor movement or within a union, any anti-communist pockets, and try to give them lots of funding and support and encourage them to break away and form a separate union organization, a separate labor federation to rival the main one. Or when the Marshall Plan was first put forward in 1947, they were kind of like the Free Trade Union Committee was trying to convince unions in Western Europe to get behind and support the Marshall Plan, which was kind of like a way of supporting this newly forming international capitalist system that the US was trying to create after the war. And even, I think it's important to note that even before like the Cold War officially began, the AFL leaders were already pushing for a Cold War. They didn't want to remain having this kind of alliance or popular front unity between communists and non-communist progressives. They wanted a break. They wanted a split. So that's what they were pushing for throughout the 1940s. There was the World Federation of Trade Unions, WFTU, which was created right after the war in 1945, that included unions from the Soviet Union as well as unions from Britain and France and the United States, the CIO, which was still more left wing at that point, and the AFL like boycotted this new organization, World Federation of Trade Unions, and supported having it like be split um, along like communist and anti-communist lines. Eventually, by 1949, the CIA, which had just recently been created, took note of all the work the Free Trade Union Committee was doing and decided to start funding the Free Trade Union Committee. And people like Jay Lovestone and his agents, who were fanned out in different parts of the world, were like providing intelligence to the CIA about foreign workers' movements, about who the leaders were, and about what the big debates were. So there were a number of projects that they were kind of working on in various countries.
Yeah, one of the projects that you wrote a bit about in one of your articles was, after the FTUC had just gotten CIA money, they set up an office in Taiwan after the Communist Revolution in China in 1949. And through this office, they supported this organization there called the Free China Labor League. And they sort of used that as a front for espionage activities, right? And this was like the vehicle through which they organized a lot of these anti-communist agents in Taiwan. And then they would travel to China and collect intelligence and then like try to stir up worker unrest in the factories there, right?
Yeah, this was like the kind of the wildest thing that the Free Trade Union Committee, the FTUC, was doing with CIA money. It was the single largest disbursement of CIA money to the Free Trade Union Committee, something like $145,000. But yeah, they set up this organization in Taiwan called the Free China Labor League shortly after the Communist Revolution in China. It was like an alliance with the Kuomintang that had, the anti-communists who had just lost to Mao in China, and the Free China Labor League was, outwardly it was like a kind of, well, it was like a sort of propaganda and educational kind of organization around um, organizing workers in Taiwan and speaking out against, communist oppression in China and that kind of thing. But really, they were using CIA money to train and then secretly send spies to the Chinese mainland to, conduct like espionage and report intelligence back, through radios, but also like sabotage, like blowing up fuel supplies. There was like one incident that some historians have written about, that apparently like they blew up a fuel supply in Shanghai and dozens of civilians got killed. And yeah, they were trying to stir up worker unrest in factories to try to like sabotage China's economy and things like that. Um, Eventually, when the Korean War started, the CIA like stopped being interested in this and kind of cut off the funding. And so these agents, these spies who were they were basically like left behind
Mm,
and abandoned, and eventually they got caught, and executed for committing basically terrorism in China.
yeah.
And yeah, so that was sort of the most extreme kind of example, and this was all like the AFL was basically like involved, kind of at the center of all this, which is really extraordinary because their whole thing was, pure and simple unionism and staying out of, not being too political, and just, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work and that kind of thing. And now they were doing all kinds of horrible espionage, sabotage, terrorist types of activities in China with the CIA as a CIA front. It's important to note that like the Free Trade Union Committee that was doing all this stuff on behalf of the AFL was really just a small handful of top AFL leaders, and most AFL leaders and AFL members didn't know that any of this was happening at the
Mhm.
time.